Hello everyone, hope you're doing well. Today, in War Thunder, I thought we would go over some news which has been happening over the last month or so when it comes to updates 1.95. We're going to be talking about top tier vehicles in this video, and also what has been confirmed not to come in an update, which is one of the first times that's ever really happened when it comes to Gaijin themselves. And I would like to say, it is nice to get positive news, but it's also nice to get negative news as well, which would be, the limiting vehicles not coming into a game on an update, because it means that we can speculate on other areas of the game. So one thing that I want to talk about is the Mirage. The Mirage has been a vehicle which has been greatly anticipated by a lot of individuals because, well, it's the next step technically in French aviation when we look at the tech tree. There's a lot of history behind the Mirage III, there is a lot of variants of the Mirage III, and also further on, such as the Mirage 2000 and even the Mirage 5. And also, you can kind of understand why it would make sense if we have a look at history. You have update 1.85, Supersonic. This was last year's update in December, so this would have been a year after, a year before update 1.95 will eventually come out. And it dropped two of the first supersonic vehicles that we ever saw in War Thunder, the F-100D and the MiG-19 PT, as you can see here. It also dropped the Javelin, but we'll talk about that in a bit. And a lot of people have taken this idea, me including, when it comes to formulating these types of ideas, and said, well, if it happened then, in update 1.85, along with an Italian ground tech tree, why could it not happen with the Swedish aviation tree, and also some more of these supersonics? So a lot of people stipulated these ideas, and I think they're good ideas to talk about. Unfortunately, Grom came in and smashed everyone's dreams. So Grom Voyny, who if you don't know is a member of Gaijin's store team, he is a straight shooter when it comes to his comments on the forums, and definitely a person to follow, just because he is straight to the point, and he sometimes makes really funny comments. Basically, I'm not sure if it's inadvertently, but if it is, inadvertently, then fair enough. But I just enjoy them. So Grom said in reply to, "Hey Stavro Forus, did you know that Gaijin's gonna add a Mirage in the next update? Crazy, isn't it?" And Grom says, "We aren't. Don't make false statements, please." So it's pretty simple. The Mirage is not coming. Now, when it comes to this comment, Grom has said, nope, not happening. Therefore, there is going to be no Mirage in update 1.95. And there was a few statements afterwards to clarify this. So you can see that someone says, "Now we know it won't be added next patch," and Grom says, "I save you from many pages of useless speculation while waiting for devlogs to come. I should remind everyone an obvious thing. Our aircraft guys are fully loaded with upcoming Swedish tree and don't have much time for other nations in 195. There will be some, of course, but not many at all." So for me, that looks like what's going to happen is we're going to get a full Swedish aviation tech tree, which I think is great if they're working hard on that, and not a lot of other aviation vehicles. But one thing we did see with the Italian ground forces being added, you can see that you had the ground forces right here of Italy, then you had top tier aircraft being the main feature of the aviation, and then you had a few sprinklings of vehicles when it came to the other nations for ground. I feel like we're going to get this for aviation, where you're going to get a full Swedish aviation tech tree, and then a sprinkling of other stuff for other nations, and then also some ground vehicles which will be top tier. It makes sense for update 1.95 to see this, mainly because it is one of the largest gaps between 1.95 and 1.97, just like 1.85 and 1.87. So you want people to have the longest time to grind out these top tier vehicles, and also on top of it, it's a great time for Gaijin to live test stuff such as the Javelin with this delta wing design, which went through many problems on the live stage, of War Thunder. The next point we're going to bring up is from Grom again, once again, talking about the Mirage not coming, but he also talks about some other vehicles that aren't going to turn up. Fire Raid says here, okay, so no Mirage. However, what about a Jaguar? So he's talking about the Sepeket Jaguars there, the French and British, amalgamation of an aircraft, or the F-104s, so the Starfighters, F-4s, so I believe that's also the Phantoms. We could still see those, perhaps. And Grom says, no. So there's going to be none of these vehicles that a lot of people have been asking for a long time. And then also, Fiernan says, could you give us a general time frame how things are looking with Swedish tanks? Will it be a case like France, where we get them rather quickly after the aircraft, or can we expect a longer wait? And Grom says they will come out next year. All I can say at this point, which is a given anyway, since 1.95 is about aviation. So the main focus of 195 is going to be aviation, and predominantly Swedish aviation. Now, we could be talking about Sweden there as a whole, or he could be talking about the whole updates. We'll have to see when dev blogs start coming out. I'm personally interested to see what's going to come along in the aviation district for Sweden, because it means that there'll be more World War II vehicles that I can play and enjoy, and also some really beautiful, supersonic jets to enjoy as well. Another thing I also want to point out from Grom is this wonderful comment. And this is what I mean, where he's like straight to the point on a lot of issues. And it backs up something that I've said for a long time, and maybe in a slightly different way. So Grom says here, they were talking back in October 17th about the changes to repair costs, and also BR changes about the OF-40. Because obviously the OF-40 MTCA went up, but stuff like the A1A1L44 stayed the same as the AMX-30 Super, even though if you look at their stats, they should technically be better vehicles than the MTCA. And Grom says, tank stats don't mean much when majority of its owners are bad players, and thus it has bad effectiveness in stats. So, a little bit of a shot there at the A1A1L44 players, but at the same time, like, it's, if you want to go by stats, sure, but at this, you've got to, like, if you want to balance like that, then you're going to get some really weird, wacky outcomes, and it's basically just down to what players play what, and I generally don't like that idea. I've been through it in the past, but it's nice to see Grom basically mixing the mad cuz bad idea and also the get good idea with this comment. So yeah, there's also a thing from Rish in this area where it says, because in effect it's significantly more effective, it's one step above all of the 8.7s. I mean, no, it isn't. It might be by stats, by win rates and by KD, but it definitely isn't when it comes to performance. Something that has to also be said at this point, just as a little bit of a sidetrack, I was thinking the other day how Gaijin have said many times that they don't want to make stats such as win rates and KDs of vehicles open to the public, because therefore people will just abuse the system. They'll just play stuff which has really high win rates or really good KDs, and therefore you'll get really singular meta when it comes to what is going on. My counter to this is already happening, and also, if you look at other games, such as stuff like League of Legends, Dota, if you look at even just MOBAs in general, and if you look at World of Tanks or World of Warships, all of these are publicly available, and you still see people play different vehicles than the ones which just have a crazy high win rate. So for me, it would be nice if all these stats were public, so we could understand some of these decisions, instead of, basically saying, don't look behind the curtain, but this is what it is, because it leaves an air of untrustworthiness when it comes to it. But anyway, moving on from Grom's statements, we had some statements from Esmin. And if you don't know who Esmin is, he's a community manager. He's generally quite nice to talk to. Had a bit of an issue back in the day when it came to some comments he made about the R2Y2, but luckily he clarified it and, fixed the problem. Now, he says, we have never said a vehicle is specifically not coming in an update, and then it does. Game development plans change for sure. For many years, we said the F-100 and the MiG-19 were not possible. However, after player feedback and a lot of internal work and testing, they did become reality. But comparing years' worth of work and answers to an update just around the corner, which we have explicitly said will not contain the Mirage, is not at all the same thing. So yeah, he's basically going from the arguments where, as you can see from Stupid White Dude, which, is quite an applicable name, Gaijin has said a lot of stuff that they end up going back on. Don't be surprised if we see a Mirage or F-104 or whatever in this patch. The problem is it's too close, as Esmin put here. If they said we're not going to see the Mirage in the next 2 years, or, the next 3 years, then therefore it would be an odd statement, because I could guarantee it's going to come in that time. But since it's just so close to update 1.95, development plans can just not change that quickly. If you've ever talked to... Tarkov did a really cool live stream. They had a large update about a month ago, maybe 2 months ago. They did this live stream where they got a lot of content creators on, and also the head guy over at the Tarkov team, and basically talked about his development process and his team, and how it was a lot of work, and how a lot of these plans were put in half a year to a year, or even more, before they were fully developed. So seeing something change in the matter of a month, unless it's something really drastic, like that modifications, the premium modifications idea they tried to bring in, it would be incredibly surprising, especially from a vehicle point of view. The next one is just Esmin saying as well some other stuff. So the first one is he's talking about the Soldati class here, which was obviously I talked about in the last video, talking about the Italian Navy, and he says the ship was featured during the closed CBT testing phase when all nations generally had some ships available. In the same way, there were some Japanese vessels presented that are now featured in the tree. This ship will return when the Italian fleet tree is added. So yes, the Italians will be getting the Soldati class. I thought it was a no-brainer it was going to happen, but at least we have clarification. The next one, though, which is a little bit further down, is just kind of a nail on the head to the coffin of of what Grom was saying. So Mertrel says here, there is one proof, and it was only a no by a store team, not a dev. And as Esmin says, not just one, multiple. As recently as Friday, I also explained to you that the Mirage is not coming this update. And he points towards here, and he says, please stop ignoring this over and over just to spam posts about this aircraft. It has nothing to do with rumors, leaks, or dev blogs. This is the last time you will be warned about it from this post. Our information, store team and CMs, comes from the developers, so what we say is correct. Now, okay, but the problem with that last line, everything else is great. But the problem with that last line is what we've run into in the past, which is when we get told there was a miscommunication, we get told that the problem was that some ideas were extrapolated on. So let's say the devs say one thing, and then the not the community manager, but somebody like a team member basically extrapolates and takes another idea from it. So saying that the information is always correct, I don't think is good, because we've seen areas in the past where this just isn't the case. So it's always really really worrying to say we're always 100% correct, or we are always 100% true, because there's just, all you need is one example to prove that wrong, and there has been examples in the past, so you got to be careful about that. But yeah, he's talking about here how the Mirage definitely isn't coming. It's as simple as that. And that's going to annoy a lot of people in update 1.95, but at the end of the day, It is an unfortunate thing, and I'm sure it will eventually come, just not in 1.95. The other thing I also want to mention when it comes to it is some of the ideas around the Mirage 3, which I've talked about a little bit, but not a ton, since it was past the developers a while back. There was also a few comments made by Grom about how these suggestions past the developers don't really mean a lot, and then later on, Esmin and also Grom saying that they listen to community feedback, and also some of the stuff from the suggestions does finally make it into the game. So, you know, there's a little bit of mixed messaging, but I believe what they're talking about is the idea that even though, you know, stuff is past the developers, that stuff may already be being worked on, or maybe it gives them plans for further in the future than they're already planning. So let's talk about the Mirage 3, or some specific areas, because we have talked about its history in the past, and, you know, we've actually done a full video talking about it in general. So the first thing to understand is the Mirage 3 is an incredibly powerful aircraft from France. It was the first Western European combat aircraft to exceed Mach 2 in horizontal flight. So that's basically why it is seen as really powerful, and also why it should be iconic to the game. It also is part of the French Air Force, or was part of the French Air Force, I should say, and kind of the crowning jewel, at least of the mid-1900s, since it was introduced in 1961 into service. The other thing to also mention is some of the armaments that this has. It is Mach 2.2 capable, so very similar to the vehicles that we have in game right now. And the thing is, you also have to understand that it's Mach 2.2 at 12,000 meters. So yeah, it's definitely an incredibly, you know, it's an incredibly powerful machine. It has two 30mm, so it does have a primary armament, and it also carries two AIM-9 Sidewinders. So it is capable of carrying this. And one of the things why I personally think it's actually being held back, at least maybe it's not finally developed, but I've got a feeling, right? So if you have a look at aviation history, or if you have a look at stages, I suppose, when it comes to War Thunder, one of the things which we haven't really gone into is the expansion of air-to-air missiles after Sidewinders. We have a few vehicles in the game which definitely have stuff such as the Saddam Mistral, or, you know, the helicopters with their incredibly powerful air-to-airs, you know, with stuff like the Mistrals, and also stuff like I can't remember the name of it right now, but the incredibly curvy, the incredibly curvy American missile, which is found on the Lynx. The problem is, though, when I think about the Mirage, the first thing that comes to mind is not the AIM-9, it's actually the Matra, the R550 Magic missiles. And this is something which, even though in-game we have an expansion to the AIM-9Es, and we've also seen an expansion to stuff like the Firelashes because of the Swift, these are not, you know, the Firelashes are a completely different kettle of fish, but we haven't seen an expansion past something like the AIM-9E when it comes to airplanes. We've seen AIM-9Ls, as I said, we've seen stuff like that, but we've never seen something which really goes past the Sidewinder era. And the reason for this, I think, is because of operational range of a lot of these missiles. If you look at the R550s, which are a air-to-air missile which is used by the Mirage and also by many other countries even to this day, the operational range of this thing is 15 kilometers. So this now extends the combat range by at least 2 over stuff like even the best AIM-9Es in-game. So for me, when I think about the Magic missiles, I think about machines like the Mirage 3E, and I've got a feeling that when stuff like when these types of missiles get added, we're also going to get an update where we get a bunch of Mirages at the same time. Well, not a bunch of Mirages, but a bunch of vehicles like the Mirage and the Mirage, and we're going to get a further extension of this extended combat, which of course happens, in aviation to this day. So yeah, I think that's definitely an idea that is being fought with, because otherwise, when you have a look at its general weapons on the Mirage, it's pretty lackluster for a delta wing aircraft. You have two AIM-9s or, two 30s, but if you can give it, two R-550s or all of the bombs that it could carry, then you have a different story on your hands. So it's definitely something to think about. Another thing as well, which is definitely speculation on my end, is when we have a look at the delta wing design, I think a lot of people are going to be disappointed by it. And as somebody who has read up a lot on the Javelin, also seen a lot of footage of the Javelin in game, and also has many friends who played the Javelin, it seemed like it took a long time for it to get to a decent space in the game, and with many BR decreases and also flight model changes, and also the addition of radar. But I thought it was a way, as I said, to live test some ideas, such as the delta wing and such as the radar components of the game. So hopefully, with the Javelin falling foul, hopefully, we will get to a point where something like the Mirage can flurry from it. The next vehicle I want to talk about after the Mirage is the Lightning, and this is kind of a passing comment, because the Lightning is kind of in the same situation as the Mirage when it comes to armament, but it does have, a very similar speed to it. One of the reasons why the Lightning was not added sorry, I shouldn't say that. So the Lightning is obviously going to be added at some point, but when the British Phantom was added, one of the things that was used as a talking point a lot was the reason why the Phantom for the Phantom for the British was better than the Lightning was because of its combat effectiveness in the game. It was able to do multi-role a lot better than the Lightning, where the Lightning would be much more designed for just a fighter role. And this is also a narrative which we're seeing from the Mirage. And it's a narrative which, if you are a person who just wants to play the best of the best vehicles, then yes, you probably wouldn't touch the Lightning. But at the same time, if we're talking about from a historic point of view and wanting to see these vehicles before they get power creeped out of the game, which eventually will happen once we get the next stage of aviation, I think it is incredibly important for stuff like the Lightning to be put into the game because of this fact. You've got to remember that the Lightning it was kind of limited in its weaponry when it came to what it used. It used fire streaks, and then it used what are known as Siddeley red tops, which were the expansion on top of fire streaks. So we're not talking about crazy weaponry here. It also had access to two 30mm Aidens, which of course is really, really juicy. But the main thing is I don't like the argument from the Lightning where we need to add meta vehicles. It's the same reason why France got something like an F-100 to give it a vehicle so it could have a supersonic vehicle. It also is a marketing ploy for France's first supersonic vehicle, and then with the British Phantom, the first competitive top tier vehicle after the Javelin, which of course was not very competitive. But I really don't like that argument, and I hope that it's not used for the Mirage and the Lightning in the future. One thing I do want to talk about, though, is since we know that there's going to be no Jaguars, there's going to be no F-104s, there's going to be no Phantoms, there's going to be no Mirage, when it comes to 195, what are we expecting when it comes to top tier jets? Because obviously there is other supersonics out there, and there is a ton which are connected to the Swedish tech tree. One of these narratives which goes around a lot about Sweden is Sweden does not have a does not have its own homegrown vehicles, and I don't know why, and this goes back to World War II. Sweden actually had a ton of different vehicles during World War II. Just because they didn't get involved in the fighting, technically, then that doesn't mean that they didn't have like a full powerhouse when it came to production and design. And we see this through the 1950s and 60s as well, when we have a look at stuff like the Draken, the SK-35C that you see in front of you, which of course had some very interesting design ideas past it. The first one being, of course, the delta wing design, which is known as the double delta wing design. So they went doubly as hard on this. Another thing as well is this was the first fully supersonic aircraft to be deployed in Western Europe, and it's also my pick for the vehicle, which will be the top tier for the Swedish when it comes out. If you want a cool delta wing design like the Mirage that you see here, why not just go for a double delta wing? You know, why not just go for a little bit more? The other thing as well is the Draken was the first aircraft to complete a Cobra maneuver. And if you don't know what a Cobra maneuver is, this is really cool. So this thing here, the Cobra maneuver simply, and this is from Wikipedia, is a dramatic and demanding maneuver in which an airplane flying at a moderate speed suddenly raises the nose momentarily to vertical position and slightly beyond, before dropping it back to normal, effectively making the plane a full-body air brake which momentarily stalls the plane. How cool is that? You know, it's definitely an interesting little part of history when it comes to it. But also, the reason why I think this is going to be the top tier of the Swedish tech tree is because this was developed straight from the Saab J29 Tunnen, or as you guys know it, the Flying Barrel, which of course we have in the game. Let's find it. This machine right here that we have in War Thunder as the premium, and it was also developed on top of the Lansen, which is this vehicle. And what is so the Lansen also has an interesting story, and I just want to go into it a bit. It wasn't supersonic. It went 1,200 kilometers an hour, and the interesting thing about the Lansen is supposedly it was designed, or the initial designs came from Switzerland, and they also included drawings of stuff like the Messerschmitt P.1101, which, of course, if you don't know, is a single jet fighter project from World War II from the Germans. It never got off the ground because of the fact that, you know, they never fully completed one. But it's just odd that you have this vehicle from Sweden. You know, the Saab 32 Lansen, which seems to derive some of its designs from German World War II aircraft. It was introduced in 1956, and the key reason why I personally think it's going to be in the game is because of the fact that it's not, you know, Mach 1. On top of this, it has 4 30mm Aidens and also 4 RB-24s, which we'll get into. So the Lansen, I am kind of surprised that it didn't take any design ideas from the Swift. It looks incredibly like the Swift and even has 4 30mm, so I don't know, it just seems a little bit odd. But moving back to this, you know, this big hunk of junk, the Draken, the one thing that really sets the Draken apart when we compare it to other Swedish aircraft is not just its speed, you know, being Mach 2 capable at 11,000 meters. The other thing is its guns. It's able to bring 2 30mm or 1 30mm Aidens, depending on what style of configuration it has. My guess is it will have, you know, 2 30mm on it, and also the missiles. As I talked about with the Mirage III, one of the big problems is that it could carry these magic missiles. The magic missiles being the next step in air-to-air missile development. The Draken can't. The Draken had access to the RB-24s, the RB-27s, and the RB-28s. Now, what are these? Because obviously these are Swedish designations of things. So the RB-24 is the AIM-9s, the sidewinders. They normally refer to the AIM-9Bs, which were used on, or at least were attached to stuff like the J-29, the barrel, which we have in game. You can see them right here on this picture. And then they were also attached to machines such as the Draken. So you have a machine here which has decent guns, has decent speed, has access to RB-24s. How about, what does RB-27s and 28s? What are these things? Well, the RB-27 is the Hughes Falcon GAR-3A missile, which was in Swedish service. It was equipped with a new proximity fuse and used on the Draken. Then you got the RB-28, which is the Hughes Falcon GAR-4 IR Seeker with a GAR-2 body. Now, what is this that I'm talking about? It's as simple as this. So this is an AIM-4. This was used, or supposed to be used, during Vietnam, the AIM-4 Falcon. And in my opinion, this is one of the missiles that we're missing when it comes to the game. And it doesn't have a great history. It really struggled when it came to actual air-to-air combat. It was designed as an air-to-air missile, and the problem that it had, at least with its early models when it was used, was it didn't have a proximity fuse. So you had to be able to hit a target directly with it, and the engineers behind it believed that it was maneuverable enough, believed that it had a decent enough operational range, and so you wouldn't be able to you wouldn't be able to go against it, then it would be completely fine. So when stuff like the F-4 Phantom II, which remember was designed to not really carry guns because it was going to rely on its missiles pretty much completely, when it used these, it found that when it actually went after targets, it was ineffective against maneuverable fighters over Vietnam, which was pretty much what it ran into, even though it was designed to shoot down stuff like slow bombers with limited maneuverability. Because it lacked that proximity fuse, it only recorded 5 kills overall. So this AIM-4 was just a complete bust when it came to the Vietnam War, which was where it was mainly used. And also, it meant that they went back to using stuff like AIM-9 Sidewinders. It was that bad. So if we have a look at something like the Draken, which is able to carry AIM-9s and also these AIM-4s, and also it can carry the one with the proximity fuse, so the better one, which should be a bit more useful. This could easily be a tagline for the Draken when it comes to the game. It also means that you could add the AIM-4 to a lot of other vehicles, such as the Phantom we talked about before, and also others, and therefore smooth it over a little bit when it comes to the general community, when, with the amount of options that can be available. So yeah, I think the Draken is a good pick when it comes to this, and the fact is, it is kind of odd that the J-29 also carried air-to-airs, but you don't see that in-game. The J-29 does not have access to any air-to-airs in-game. My feeling is they wanted to lower its BR. Maybe at some point it will get slightly better air-to-airs. The next vehicle I want to talk about is another one which isn't Mach 1 capable, and it's just kind of to throw out there just to have an interesting idea behind it. So this is the Saab 105. The Saab 105, they made nearly 200 of these things, and it was introduced in service in 1967. This reminds me a lot of the Nat in many ways, but is slightly different. It's 970 kilometers an hour max speed, but the interesting thing about it is it doesn't have any guns. So this thing is pure AAMs, ASMs, and also gun pods, and I'm wondering if we're going to get more steps when it comes to the future of War Thunder, where we have vehicles which do not have a primary armament, and this could, they don't have a gun primary armament. They only have what are known as secondary armaments in the game, such as stuff like the F-4 Phantom that we have. Obviously, with later models of the Phantom, the gun was inbuilt. I believe the F-4E started that. Maybe we'll get that at some point. But just looking at the Saab 105, it in itself was not able to, have any in-house guns. 6 hard points though, so, it should be a little bit of fun. I just wanted to throw it in as a possible 9397 vehicle, but the lack of guns kind of suck, obviously. And then we have the one which I think, if you really are into delta wing designs. This is one of those radical ones which would wet your whistle. So this is the Viggen. The Viggen, or the Saab 37 as it's known, was introduced in 1971. So this is a little bit, modern, but I think eventually we'll get it in the game. This vehicle was Mach 2.1 capable, and as you can see, had a crazy delta wing design. And if you really wanted to sell the Swedish tech tree, this would be one of those vehicles you go with along with the Draken. It was designed as a strike fighter, an aerial reconnaissance, also maritime patrol, trainer, fighter interceptor. This thing pretty much went through everything. And as I said, it was introduced in 1971 and eventually retired in 2005. So this thing had a really long service life. It had a 20-year production run from 1970 to 1990 with 329 of them overall. So when you have something like the Draken, which was built much more as an interceptor aircraft, mainly a bomber interceptor, which was very hot at the time. You can talk to the British about that. And then you have something like the Viggen, which is pretty much, we're going to put this and design it for doing everything. It is just a really cool and innovative idea. And it was obviously successful since it was in service such a long time and a decent amount of them built. The rate of climb is kind of nuts on this thing though, 203 meters per second, which is absolutely balmy. And also, it has access to some kind of crazy weaponry. So it has 130mm Oerlikon, nothing crazy about that. But then you have having access to 6 missile stations. 2 for the Sky Flash, which were only used on the J-37, which is what we're talking about. 4 AIM-20 AMRAAMs, which is something that we may see if we see some modernizations of Phantoms. AMRAAMs are incredibly powerful Mach 4 capable missiles, which have an operational range of about 55 to 75 kilometers on their early versions, and even more on their later ones. They are, long-range missiles, so air-to-air missiles. So I highly doubt we're going to see this. Or it could have 6 AIM-9 Sidewinders, where that would make a lot more sense for this vehicle. They have talked about in the past where they do limit weapon options to balanced vehicles, and I feel like with the Saab 37, the Viggen that you see here, that could definitely happen. But then on top of it, it does mean that it leaves room for expansion for other ammunitions down the line. Very similar to with the Phantom, where the Phantom definitely could have more munitions put on it as we go along in the history of War Thunder. Same with stuff like the Viggen. So yeah, this is kind of my outside choice. I think the definite one for the top tier is, of course, the Draken and everything associated with that vehicle. Another thing I also want to point in before I finish this video is for the French, not all hope is lost. They did talk about, or I should say, Grom did talk about how there won't be a Jaguar, so no French Jaguar, there won't be an F-104 or any F-4s, and no Mirage. But you know one thing that wasn't mentioned during this whole time? This. And this was from a leak a few months ago when some form of modeler or some form of modeling assistant or receptionist or whatever did a bit of an oopsie, went on DeviantArt and uploaded a bunch of pictures. This is a French version of the Crusader, and with all the talk of Vietnam, with all the talk of these vehicles with these certain specific missiles, why not add in the Vought F-8 Crusader, which is something which would fit the meta pretty well right now, and you could also bring in some other versions. You could keep the French happy by adding in, another supersonic vehicle for them in the form of the F-8 EFN, which is actually a better version of the Crusader than the standard one that the Americans would get. So you could get yourself a nice meta vehicle which has some really cool toys towards this, which is much more designed from a ground-up point of view for gun stuff instead of the unfortunate ideas of the Phantom, which were designed much more for the missile idea. You have 420mm Colt Mark 12s in this thing. You also have access to two-side 2 side fuselage mounted pylons, also 2 underwing pylons, and a bunch of bombs, sidewinders, magics, and bullpups as well. So yeah, not all is lost in the French camp. You may still get this wonderful vehicle, and if you don't, just don't fret. You know that the Mirage is coming at some point. Patience is a virtue, as Oscar Wilde said. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. I'd just like to thank Ambrosius McClellan, B. Young, Blackie, Daniel Stanton, Jay Wilt, John Ryman, Joseph Anders, Martinez, Moxie, Super Cacti, Uyins Terry, Elove Goat, and Seductive Trash Can for supporting the channel.